Alrighty, so for today's video, we're going to talk about the shooting that occurred in Akron, Ohio on, I think it was June 27th, 2022. We're not just going to talk about the shooting, but we're also going to talk about the reaction to the shooting, because the reaction to the shooting that occurred on that day is, in my opinion, more important than the actual shooting itself. The stuff that people are saying about this incident, to be honest, some of it is absolutely insane, and it absolutely boggles my mind, and it terrifies me that this is where we are as a country and how we respond to a police-involved shooting. So first, we're going to go over the actual shooting incident. Then I'm going to go over some of the reactions to it, and of course, I'm going to share my opinions on this stuff. So I don't know, buckle up. This one might get interesting. On June 27, 2022, at approximately 12:30 a.m., officers with the Akron Police Department attempted to stop a vehicle for a traffic infraction as well as an equipment violation. 40 seconds into the pursuit, the lead officer aired that he observed the suspect fire a weapon through the driver's side door.
Getting onto 8 South of Talmadge. Reason for stop was traffic and equipment violation.
All cars. In effect.
21 shots fired. That vehicle just had a shot come out of its door.
Video of the gunshot was captured on traffic cameras in the area. Eventually, the vehicle began to slow and the driver bailed from the vehicle wearing a ski mask and attempted to flee on foot. Officers in pursuit ordered the man to stop and attempted to use a taser to end the pursuit. Moments later, the man turned towards the officer after reaching into his waistband. The officers discharged their weapons, killing Jayland Walker. A firearm was later discovered in Mr. Walker's vehicle. The following footage will show video from 2 separate officers' body camera videos. Portions of this video has been slowed down for the benefit of the viewer.
He's slowing down here, slowing down. Stop. It's in your fucking hands! It's in your fucking hands! Don't you fucking move the car! You fucking move!
Hey, don't fucking move!
Don't fucking move! Don't fucking move! Show me your hands! Show me your fucking hands!
Hey, don't fucking move! Don't fucking move! Fucking move! Don't fucking move!
All right, so now that you've had the opportunity to watch the video, it appeared that it was a pretty cut and dry incident. You have officers attempt to stop a vehicle. The vehicle decides to flee, and while they begin airing their pursuit on the radio, the driver of said vehicle sticks a handgun out the window and pops off a shot. I don't know if he was shooting at the officers or what he was shooting at, or if possibly he was just trying to show the officers that he has a firearm to maybe scare them away. But regardless of the fact, he had a gun. They knew he had a gun. He discharged that firearm during the pursuit. He begins to slow down. I think what he did is he just missed putting it in gear. He might have slipped it neutral. He might have left it in drive. Officers begin to surround the vehicle. They see potential crossfire situations. So the officers who were on the passenger side of the vehicle begin to fall back and approach from the driver's side. Jayland Walker, realizing that there was a bunch of officers on the driver's side of his car, exited his vehicle through the passenger side wearing a ski mask. He then flees from the officers who attempt to tase him. When that is ineffective, he continues to run, and at one point he turns toward the officers with his hands on his waistband. That's when they open fire and shoot and kill him. It's unfortunate that this young man lost his life on this day. I realize that he is somebody's son, somebody's cousin, somebody's brother. Those things are not missed by me. Trust me, there's no police officer on this planet that wants to kill a young man in the line of duty. Unfortunately, these officers were put in a position where there was a high probability that this man had armed, and any one of those times that he turned, he could have either shot them or shot one of their friends. This made it a deadly force situation. I guess before I get into some of the reactions, one thing that I want to remind everybody of that is somehow missed. And that's this concept that people often criticize police officers for saying that they feared for their lives when they engaged a suspect using lethal force. They're saying, and I saw it from the attorney of this guy, saying he was running away. He was not a danger to those officers at all. Well, as somebody with a law degree, I would expect you to understand that the officers are authorized to use deadly force to protect themselves or to protect others. And it has been found by the Supreme Court that it is okay to use lethal force against a person who you believe is armed, and if you let that person go, they are a danger to anybody else that they might come in contact with. A person who is carrying a gun and wearing a ski mask and had already fired at police officers poses a very serious risk, potential risk to the public. And it's those officers' duty to make sure that that man does not have the opportunity to hurt another person. Jayland Walker had ample opportunity to stop what he was doing. When his vehicle was stopped, he could have put his hands up and stopped what he was doing. He did not have to bail from the vehicle. Even when he did bail from the vehicle, if he had laid on the ground and put his hands out, none of this would have happened. Unfortunately, he put the officers in a position where they had to use deadly force. And in my opinion, this is 100% a clear-cut incident where lethal force was authorized, and these officers will be found. This will be cleared at the end of the day. Legally, none of these officers should face charges. If they do, it's an absolute travesty. So now let's get into some of the interesting reactions to this shooting. The first one, I'm going to direct your attention to NPR, which we all know as being a fair and unbiased news source when it comes to police. And the headline says, "The Akron Police shooting renews questions about officer training." And if you just start to peruse the article, it says Jayland Walker, a 25-year-old black man who was unarmed at the time he was killed by Akron Police, was shot at least 60 times, authorities said over the weekend. The sheer number of bullets were fired by as many as 8 officers, which renews prompt questions from politicians and activists who are criticizing and viewing this as excessive force. So I'm sorry, NPR. The fact that he was unarmed at the time he was killed is not really significant to this case. Now, if the officers saw him drop his firearm, that might be a different story. But every single indicator that he was showing to the officers was that there's still a very high likelihood that he was still armed at the time that they shot and killed him. putting out news stories and stuff like this is trash, and everybody should know that. Now, when it comes to the number of times that he was hit, I want to address that because that's being really blown out of proportion in the media, if you ask me. And I'll also reiterate that I believe it's already been reported that the officers fired 90 rounds. So they fired 90 rounds and they hit him somewhere in the area of 60 times. Now, when you're an officer and you're engaged with a suspect and deadly force is the appropriate level of force, and you have the means to use deadly force, it's your responsibility as an officer to go ahead and use that force, because you might have a perspective on the situation that one of your fellow officers does not have, and they might not realize that their life or the lives of others is in fact in danger. So you have a responsibility that if it's a deadly force situation to preserve life and limb of your friends and your fellow citizens, that you need to take action. There was 8 officers involved, and there was 13 officers in the pursuit, 8 of which fired their weapon. They were all in a position where they could see the suspect, they could see his activities. They believed that lethal force was the appropriate level of force, so they all presented lethal force and discharged their firearms. When you're in a lethal force situation, you're doing this because you're trying to prevent serious risk of injury to either you, one of your buddies, or somebody else in the public. You can't assume that the guy next to you is going to have an effective use of force. If you're applying that use of force, you have to assume that you have to act as if you're the only one using that level of force. So each officer independently fired a volley of 6 to 8 rounds. That is not uncommon in a police-involved shooting. The fact that it was that many officers who all fired at the same time is not going to be significant when it comes to determining whether or not this is an appropriate use of force. I also want to remind everybody that these officers are human beings, and their body reacts a certain way to stresses and everything that they were going through. They were just involved in a vehicular pursuit with a man who had discharged his weapon during that pursuit. He exits the vehicle wearing a ski mask. These are all indicators that you are in a life or death situation. This is a very serious situation. They were all running after him, and to be honest, they probably all had tunnel vision. They did not realize that as many of their coworkers were standing to their left and right as they were. And when they began firing their weapon, the world probably closed in around them, and they were completely unaware of what anybody else was doing. If you watch the entire body camera, which I'm not providing on this video, you'll see that quite like after maybe 2 seconds of firing, a couple officers began yelling, "Ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire." That was all appropriate. These officers are not to be held responsible for the use of force that somebody next to them did. Each use of force is going to be viewed independently. And also, I want to mention that the fact that 30 rounds did miss is significant, because the guy next to me, if I'm using lethal force, he might miss all of his rounds. It's my responsibility to make sure that that person is no longer a threat to anybody. So that's the reason that so many rounds were fired, and that he was hit so many times. And that's the reason that this is going to be found. I don't like using the word justified, but this is going to return with a no bill. These guys are not going to be indicted for use of force out of this. The next thing that I wanted to pull up, this was an article. Oh, this is the attorney for the family. It's important when you hear the attorney for a family talking, the only thing that he's seeing when he's talking is dollar signs. The only thing he's interested is in planting a seed so that he can earn some money. And by the way, the family's going to get a little money as well. But he is looking for a paycheck for himself first and foremost, and that is his only concern. So I highlighted this paragraph here. It says, there are 8 officers who need to answer questions, and we hope they do. We surely hope they engage in the process and be forced to answer the difficult questions. He was shot for a traffic violation. We're here to find out how. We're here to find out why. And here to hold those accountable for what happened. We're here to ask questions and see what the police officers did to de-escalate, what courage was displayed, what rule following was displayed. And I'm going to say this to any police officer who wants to avoid accountability. It will not stand. We'll get to the bottom of what occurred. So let's break down what he said. There are 8 officers who need to answer questions. We hope that they do. We surely hope that they engage in the process and will be forced to answer difficult questions. Yes, anytime there's an officer involved shooting, the officers are forced to answer difficult questions. They're gonna face multiple depositions after this. It says he was shot for a traffic violation. That is a bold-faced lie, and when you say stuff like that, you're nothing more than a freaking scumbag. This guy was shot because an officer attempted to stop him. He fled and fired a weapon while officers were pursuing him. He was exhibiting signs of being a very dangerous individual. In order to preserve the safety of their fellow officers and of the community, the officers were forced to use deadly force. He was not shot for committing a traffic offense. If you say that, you're a fucking scumbag. It says we're out here to find out how, why. I think we've already seen how and why this all happened. We're going to ask questions to see what the police did to de-escalate. Well, what the police did to de-escalate is they surrounded the car with guns drawn. If these officers approached that vehicle with the intent to murder this young man, they would have stood back and opened fire. They did not do that. They surrounded the vehicle and they gave him every opportunity to end this peacefully. They were yelling at him to stop, yelling at him to put his hands up, yelling at him, do not move. When he fled, an officer was giving pursuit. He's probably the closest officer to him. He attempted to use his taser to end this peacefully. Those were all attempts to de-escalate the situation. And he says, any officer who wants to avoid accountability, it will not stand. We will get to the bottom of what occurred. I want to talk about accountability here because this is incredibly important. The person that needs to be held responsible, the person who's accountable for what happened that day, is Jayland Walker. Somebody needs to say it. And I'm not afraid to, because that's the truth. We should not be afraid to tell the truth. That's one of the biggest problems with our society today. This guy doesn't care about anything. The only thing he cares about is getting paid. Then here's the last thing that I wanted to address. One of my friends texted me this, kind of made me angry. He said, this is a pastor. This is a guy pretending to be a man of God. And he's out there making statements that are incendiary and that are going to get people riled up. He's talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's saying, we want people to be peaceful. Don't disrespect the life and the death of this young man. But he's also out here saying a lot of stuff that's going to get people riled up. And this is the statement that I really want to highlight. He says, we want to take that. We want to take it and use it for benefit of systemic change. We want to be treated like human beings, black men, young men. We're afraid when it comes to the police, and we shouldn't be. So let's break this one down for a second. We want to take that and we want to use it as a benefit of some systemic change. What systemic change do you think is going to come from this? Are you implying that we need to systemically change the police department because a young man fled from the police in a vehicle, fired a weapon, gave every indication that he was armed, ran and turned towards the police officers, and was shot and killed? You're saying that we need to systemically change the way the police do things because this man made a decision to do what he did. If we need systemic change, the systemic change we need is that we need to tell these pastors to stop making excuses for the criminals that are committing these acts. That is the systemic change we need. The systemic change that we need is that whenever an incident like this happens, we don't instantly blame the police, because there was a variety of mistakes made in this situation. And those mistakes were not made by the police. They were made by the man who unfortunately lost his life. He made poor decisions and he died because of it. If you're going to talk about systemic change, that's the change we need in our society. That these men need to be taught that that kind of activity is going to get you killed. Said we want to be treated like human beings, you know, black men and young men. So you saw the video. I'll go ahead and put a screenshot up now. Those officers were behind a vehicle. They couldn't tell what the driver looked like. All they knew is that there was a traffic infraction and an equipment violation, and this guy wasn't going to stop. And then all of a sudden, this guy produced a weapon. He fired that weapon. When he got out of the car, he's wearing a ski mask. There's no indication whatsoever about the race of the individual that was in that car. None, absolutely, at all. And to insert that into this is foolish, and it's dishonest. And you're going to get people hurt because of it. Should be ashamed of yourself for making that comment. It says that they're afraid when it comes to police, and they shouldn't be. That's a lie. I'm a police officer, and there's plenty of videos out there. Black people are not afraid of the police. The reason, the examples I will give to show that is how many times are police officers out conducting business, and a lot of these young black men who are supposed to be afraid of the police will actively engage the police and incite them and entice them and try to get them to do something. They do these things because they are absolutely not afraid of the police. I think I've covered everything that I want to cover. This shooting and the reaction to this shooting is incredibly disappointing. As a society, we should be better than this. That's all I got today.